In the lands of the far north, where winter lingers and the wind whispers through pine and stone, there lived a people for whom the world was never silent. For the Vikings, every tree, every river, every mountain carried a presence. The earth breathed, the skies watched, the sea listened. This is the beginning of their faith, not through books or commandments, but through a deep and constant awareness of nature and the unseen. The Vikings did not separate the sacred from the everyday. To live was to be spiritual. The gods were not distant rulers. They were companions, protectors, witnesses. And just as the world shifted with season and storm, so too did the ways the Norse people honored what they believed in. In this first part of our journey, we step gently into the heart of Viking spirituality, not to tell myths, but to understand the rhythm of belief that shaped every home, every farm, every voyage. Imagine a small Viking settlement built near a calm fjord. The longhouses are sturdy, with turf-covered roofs, smoke drifting slowly into the sky. Inside, people gather not just to eat or sleep, but to share stories, light fires, and offer quiet thanks. In a corner of the house stands a small wooden figure carved from oak. It represents Thor, protector of the home, guardian of travelers. Not grand or elaborate, but carefully made. Beside it, a bowl of oats, some dried fish, and a splash of mead. These are offerings, gifts to the spirit world, given freely and without fear. This was the heart of Viking faith, a balance of respect and exchange. The gods were honored, not begged. Offerings were made to maintain harmony, to show gratitude, or to ask for safe passage, good harvest, or healing. It was not transactional. It was relational. The Viking spiritual world was filled with many beings, not just gods. There were landvetter, the land spirits, who watched over fields, forests, and even specific rocks. If treated kindly, they brought luck. If offended, they withdrew their favor. It was common, when building a new house or cutting down trees, to leave an offering first: a piece of bread, a coin, a song. This was not superstition. It was part of an ongoing relationship with the land itself. And then there were the Disir, female ancestral spirits who watched over families. They could appear in dreams, in visions, or simply in a sense of knowing. A woman stirring a pot at the hearth might pause, close her eyes, and whisper thanks to the women who came before her. It was said that they protected the home, the children, the memory of bloodlines. The spiritual practices of the Vikings were mostly oral and practical. There were no temples in the way we think of them today. Sacred spaces could be found outdoors: groves, stones, waterfalls, places where the world felt thinner, where breath seemed to slow and silence took on meaning. Rituals often took place during important times of year: harvest, solstice, new moon. These were moments when the veil between the worlds was believed to grow thinner. People gathered to share food, burn offerings, pour mead on the ground, and speak the names of gods and ancestors alike. Not all rituals were dramatic. Most were quiet, folded into daily life. A fisherman might whisper to Njord, god of the sea, before pushing his boat into the water. A blacksmith might mutter a blessing to Thor before striking iron. A mother might draw a protective symbol with her finger on her child's forehead before bed. These small acts of reverence wove the divine into the fabric of each day. And there were those among the Norse who walked more deeply in the spiritual path, the Volur, or seeresses. These were often women, respected and sometimes feared. They traveled between villages, offering prophecy, healing, and spiritual guidance. Clad in cloaks, carrying staffs, they were seen as bridges between the worlds. Their words were not questioned lightly. Unlike many religious figures in other cultures, the vulva was not a priest, but a traveler, both in the physical world and in the unseen. She might lead a ritual or sit alone with someone in grief. She was not always welcomed, but always respected. So much of the Viking faith was about flow between land and sky, gods and mortals, past and present. Their belief was not built on rigid laws, but on relationship, on shared breath with the earth, on watching the stars and listening to dreams, on honoring the dead not with monuments, but with memory. As night falls over the fjord, the village settles into rest. Somewhere in the forest, a fox stirs. The wind moves through the pines. Inside the longhouse, the small figure of Thor stands quietly in the firelight, beside the bowl of oats and the splash of mead. Outside, the northern lights shimmer faintly over the snow, and the spirit of the old ways waits, not in silence, but in stillness. In the world of the Vikings, the divine was never far away. It was in the wind that filled a sail, in the thunder that rolled across the mountains, in the flame that danced within the hearth. The gods of Norse tradition were not perfect beings, distant and untouchable. They were powerful, yes, but also deeply personal. They had strengths and weaknesses. They could be fierce, joyful, stubborn, or wise. They walked among people in stories, and sometimes, it was believed, in life. To understand the Viking faith is to understand how these gods were seen, not as distant creators, but as companions through life's uncertain journey. There were many gods and goddesses, each with their own character and domain, but some stood out above the rest: Odin, Thor, and Freya among them. Odin was the All-Father, the Wanderer, the god of wisdom and poetry. He gave up one of his eyes to drink from the well of knowledge, and was often imagined traveling the world in disguise. He was not just a god of war, but a god of thought, of sacrifice, of vision. He was honored by warriors and poets alike, those who sought more than just strength, but understanding. To offer to Odin was to accept mystery. His symbols, the raven, the spear, the gallows, spoke of fate and the weight of knowing too much. Then there was Thor, god of thunder, protector of mankind, wielder of the mighty hammer Mjolnir. While Odin represented the mind, Thor represented the body. He was strength, stability, and force. His hammer was not only a weapon, it was a symbol of protection, and it was often used to bless marriages, births, and homes. Thor was perhaps the most beloved of all the gods among ordinary people. Farmers, fishermen, and blacksmiths turned to him in times of need. He was familiar, dependable, and never far from reach. Small pendants shaped like his hammer were worn around the neck, not only for luck, but for courage. And then there was Freya, goddess of love, fertility, magic, and death. She was not one thing, but many. She could be gentle or terrible. She rode a chariot pulled by cats and wore a cloak of falcon feathers. She watched over women, over birth and passion, but also over warriors fallen in battle. For while half the slain went to Odin's hall, the other half came to Freya's field. Freya's connection to magic, known as cider, made her both honored and mysterious. She embodied the feminine divine in its most powerful form, and her presence was deeply felt in the rituals and spiritual practices of daily life. But there were other gods too. Njord, the sea god, brought calm waters and prosperous fishing. His children, Freyr and Freya, brought fertility and good harvests. Heimdall, the watchman, guarded the boundaries between worlds. And Loki, the trickster, reminded people that not all things could be controlled. These gods were not worshipped in formal temples. There were no pews, no sermons. Instead, the Vikings honored them in nature, in sacred groves, by rivers, around stones worn smooth by time. Offerings were made with sincerity: food, tools, sometimes blood. A ritual might be as small as placing a carved figure on a family altar, or as large as a seasonal blot, a community-wide feast with sacrifices and songs. In either case, the purpose was the same: to maintain the balance between human and divine, between the visible and the unseen. To live in harmony with the gods was to acknowledge their presence in all things. Before a voyage, sailors might offer ale to Njord and ask for gentle winds. Before planting crops, farmers might call upon Freyr to bless the soil. At births, weddings, or funerals, the hammer of Thor might be symbolically raised, not to strike, but to sanctify. The gods were part of the cycle of life. They did not demand perfection. What they asked for was respect, awareness, and participation in the flow of things. This deep sense of interconnection meant that faith was not reserved for special moments. It was part of everything. And though not everyone had the same gods at the center of their lives, some families favored Thor, others Freya. The spiritual fabric of Norse society was one of inclusion and fluidity. Belief was not enforced, but lived. As evening settles over the village, the wind picks up over the water. A father mends a fishing net near the fire. His son watches, then looks to the carved hammer hung above the door. It swings slightly, catching the light. There are no prayers spoken aloud, only a quiet understanding that something greater is always near. The gods, after all, are not locked in the sky. They move through the world. They walk with the people, and in the hush of twilight, when the smoke from the hearth mixes with the mist from the sea, the divine does not feel far away. Among the Vikings, faith was not something hidden behind stone walls or spoken only in whispers. It was woven into the rhythms of everyday life and expressed through rituals both great and small. From the quiet act of leaving food at a household altar to the grand ceremonies of sacrifice and feast, Viking rituals were a way of connecting with the gods, with the land, and with each other. These acts weren't only performed in hope or desperation, they were part of a cycle of giving and gratitude, of marking time and honoring the forces that shaped the world. In this part of our journey, we step into the heart of these rituals, not the legends, but the lived expressions of belief. The most well-known public ritual among the Norse people was the blot. This was a sacrificial feast held to honor the gods, the spirits of the land, and the ancestors. The word itself simply meant sacrifice, but it could range from a modest offering to a grand communal event lasting several days. A blot might be held to welcome the first frost or to bless the sowing of seeds. It might be offered at Yule, the midwinter festival, or at the beginning of spring. Whatever the occasion, it was both sacred and social. Imagine a gathering on a cold winter's night. Villagers arrive from surrounding farms, bringing barrels of mead, baskets of bread, cured meats, and fresh caught fish. At the center of the gathering is an altar, a flat stone, perhaps, or a carved wooden post. There may be a symbolic figure representing a god, but it's the atmosphere that matters most: reverence, warmth, and shared purpose. Animals may be sacrificed, not in cruelty, but in solemn gratitude. The meat is cooked and shared. The blood, considered sacred, is sprinkled on people and objects to bless them. Songs are sung, stories are told, and horns of mead are passed hand to hand. At the heart of the blot is a simple idea: giving something of value in return for life's gifts. But most rituals were far more personal. In the home, small offerings might be placed on a shelf or near the hearth. A bit of milk poured into the earth, a piece of bread left by a tree, a whisper of thanks before a long journey. These gestures needed no audience. They were sincere moments of exchange, reminders that the world was alive with spirit. One particularly sacred type of offering was directed to the land vetter, the land spirits. Before plowing a field or cutting down a grove, it was customary to offer food or drink to these spirits, seeking their favor. To ignore them was to invite misfortune. In some regions, farmers carved faces into wooden posts and placed them at the edge of their land, asking the landvetter to guard their crops and their homes. Seasonal festivals also held spiritual importance. Yule, celebrated during the darkest days of winter, was both a time of survival and of hope. Fires were lit to honor the returning sun, and families gathered to eat, drink, and remember those who had passed on. At Yule, ancestral spirits were especially close. People might speak to them around the fire, or leave a place at the table for their unseen presence. This was not frightening. It was comforting. The dead were not gone. They were part of the circle watching over the living. Another powerful festival was Disablat, held in honor of the Disir, female ancestral spirits and goddesses who protected families and shaped fate. Women often played leading roles in these rites, invoking the blessings of their foremothers through song, offering, and quiet invocation. Vikings also held ritual duels and symbolic contests to mark significant events. These were not mere games, but ways to resolve disputes, honor the gods, or test strength under sacred witness. Even storytelling could become a form of ritual, especially when skalds, the Norse poets, recited ancient tales during feasts. Through story, memory lived on. Spiritual practice was not always joyous. In times of plague, famine, or war, people turned to rituals of protection and purification. Fires were burned in sacred patterns. Special herbs were scattered or brewed. The vulva, the seeress, might be called to perform cider, a trance-like form of magic meant to uncover hidden truths or change the course of events. During these rituals, silence was common. Those present would sit in stillness as the vulva chanted, swayed, and whispered her visions. Her words might bring comfort or warning. Either way, they were heeded. What tied all these rituals together, grand or humble, was the intention behind them. The Vikings believed that actions had meaning, and that respect shown to the gods, the spirits, and the ancestors would echo through life. It was never about rigid doctrine. It was about rhythm. The rhythm of seasons, of giving and receiving, of birth and death and rebirth. Every ritual was a way of aligning with that rhythm, of remembering that no one walked alone. The world was full of presence, and to live well was to live in harmony with it. As the stars shine above the longhouse and the fire burns low, a bowl of mead is placed gently on the earth just outside the door, a final offering for the night. Nothing is spoken, but in that silence, everything is heard. In the spiritual world of the Vikings, not all power came from warriors or chieftains. Much of it flowed quietly through hands that healed, voices that sang to the spirits, and eyes that could see beyond what was visible. This was a world where women played a vital spiritual role as guardians of the household hearth, as keepers of tradition, and for some, as Volar, seeresses who walked between the worlds. Unlike many ancient societies where religious authority was largely male, the Viking world held space for female spiritual authority. Not always equal in every aspect of life, but deeply respected in the realm of the sacred. The most mysterious and revered of these spiritual women was the Völva, a seeress, a prophetess, a practitioner of Seder, the Norse art of ritual magic and spiritual insight. She was not part of a formal priesthood. She answered to no temple. She wandered, clad in a dark cloak, carrying a carved wooden staff. The Völvas was often called upon during moments of uncertainty. If a village was struck by illness, if war loomed, or if omens were unclear, she might be summoned to perform a rite, to speak what others could not see. Her presence was both sacred and unsettling. She belonged to the margins, both honored and feared. It was said that she could summon spirits, speak to the dead, or enter trance states where her voice became a bridge between worlds. These rituals often took place at night. In the dim glow of the hearth, or beside a sacred tree under the stars, the Völva would begin her work. Seated on a raised platform, or within a ring of standing stones, she might chant ancient verses, draw symbols into ash or snow, or breathe deeply until her voice changed. People would sit around her in silence, sometimes singing softly to support the trance, and when she spoke, they listened, whether she brought warnings or blessings, visions or instructions. The tools of her craft were simple but symbolic: a staff to channel power, a pouch of herbs for smoke and scent, a cloak for protection. Sometimes animal bones or runes were used, each item holding deep meaning, drawn from nature and ancestral memory. But spiritual power among Viking women was not limited to the seeresses. Every home was a sacred space, and women were often its spiritual center. The hearth, where meals were prepared and fire kept burning, was more than practical, it was symbolic. It was a living connection to the ancestors, the gods, and the spirit world. Women tended to the hearth not just as a chore, but as a quiet ritual. Lighting the fire each morning was an act of devotion. Keeping it burning through the long nights of winter was a symbol of life continuing in the dark. In times of birth, women gathered to support, bless, and protect both mother and child. During funerals, it was often women who prepared the body, bathed it, clothed it in linen, and placed tokens of love and memory beside it. They whispered final words. They sang lullabies not for sleep, but for the journey to the next world. In festivals like Disablat, women took leading roles. This annual rite honored the Disir, female ancestral spirits, and protectors of fate. Offerings were made in their name, prayers spoken not for grand fortune, but for strength, wisdom, and peace within the family. Even in martial society, the feminine divine was never far away. Freya, the goddess of love, fertility, magic, and battle, held a place of great reverence. She received half of those who died in combat, just as Odin did. She represented life and death, desire and power. Farmers prayed to her for good harvests, warriors for courage, lovers for connection, mothers for protection. In this balanced view, life was not a contest between masculine and feminine, but a dance between them, each force vital to the other. To the Vikings, magic and spirit flowed through all kinds of people, but especially those who moved between worlds, those who dreamed, who healed, who remembered the old songs. And so, while kings and jarls were buried with ships and swords, the grave of a Volva might contain her staff, her rings, her herbs, her bones wrapped in cloth, and the markings of her path. Her body might be surrounded by circles of stone, or buried atop a hill to keep watch for generations to come. Her memory lived not only in stories, but in silence, in the space between words, in the way a wind shifted before a storm. Today, when we look back at the Viking world, we see more than axes and raids. We see a faith where women walked with power, where they whispered to the land, sang to the ancestors, and guided their people in times of darkness. As night falls again over the snowy fields and the pine trees sway in the cold wind, a single figure stands near a fire, cloaked, steady, staff in hand. She says nothing, but the world listens. In the Viking world, nothing stood still for long. Seasons turned, ice melted, seeds sprouted, rivers changed course, fire gave way to smoke, and smoke to sky. Just as the natural world flowed from one form into another, so too did the soul. For the Norse, life and death were not opposites, but two parts of one great circle. To live was to walk a path shaped by fate and choice, woven by unseen hands and watched over by the gods. And to die was to take the next step. In this final part of our journey through Viking faith, we turn to their understanding of death, the soul, and what lies beyond the visible world. The Vikings believed in many possible destinations after death, each reflecting not only how a person died, but how they lived. There was Valhalla, the great hall of Odin, where warriors chosen by the Valkyries would feast, train, and prepare for Ragnarok, the final battle at the end of time. Here, the honored dead would drink mead from the skulls of enemies, sing heroic songs, and fight glorious battles, only to be healed and whole again each evening. But Valhalla was not for all. It was not even the most welcoming place. Others would go to Folkvanger, the field of the goddess Freya. Half of those slain in battle were said to go to her hall, a realm of beauty and balance, of peace and power. Freya, goddess of love and war, took not just the strongest, but the noblest, those who had lived with grace. Still others would journey to Hel, the underworld ruled by the goddess Hel, daughter of Loki. Unlike the later Christian idea of hell, this was not a place of punishment. It was a quiet realm, a resting place for those who died of sickness, old age, or misfortune. Its halls were calm, its soil cold, but its silence was not cruel. In hell, souls continued, not in pain, but in stillness. The soul, in Viking belief, was not a single thing. It had many parts: consciousness, breath, memory, luck. One part might linger near family, another might join the ancestors, another might return to the cycle of life, perhaps even reborn in a future child. The line between the living and the dead was never final. This is why ancestors remained present in the daily lives of the Norse. Their names were spoken aloud during meals. Their weapons and jewelry were passed down not just as inheritance, but as symbols of protection. In some households, a carved figure might represent a forefather or foremother placed near the hearth. Dreams were one of the most sacred ways the dead could visit. A whispered voice, a vision by firelight, a sense of presence in the snow. These were not seen as strange. They were expected, welcomed. In burial, the Vikings showed deep care. As we've seen, some were laid to rest in ships, either beneath the earth or atop great pyres. Others in stone circles or burial mounds that mimicked the outline of a vessel. For them, death was a journey, and the ship was the soul's vehicle through the great unknown. With the dead were buried the objects of their life: tools, weapons, food, animals, and tokens of affection. These were not offerings to appease. Rather, they were gifts for the journey, symbols of identity, and links to the world left behind. But death was not only marked by sadness, it was also a moment of transformation, a return to the earth, to the gods, to the weave of fate. Funerals were moments for reflection, for ritual, and for story. Skalds, the poets, would speak the names of the dead, recount their deeds, and preserve their legacy through verse. In this way, memory itself became sacred. A person did not live on in stone or fire alone, but in song, in voice. In the stories passed from elder to child, beside the longhouse fire. There was a profound sense of cyclic time in Norse belief. The world had a beginning, and it would have an end. But even that end, Ragnarok, was not final. After the destruction, a new world would rise. The sun would return. Life would begin again. This belief in renewal was deeply comforting. Even as they faced harsh winters, deadly storms, or violent loss, the Vikings trusted in the rhythm of life, in the cycle of the gods, in the return of light. And so, in quiet ways, they lived spiritually not only for themselves, but for the generations yet to come. Tonight, a candle burns low in a simple home. Outside, the wind moves gently through the trees. A carved stone, half covered in moss, stands at the edge of a meadow. No one speaks. But somewhere, a name is remembered, a story passed on. In the silence, the spirit lingers, not gone, not lost, just transformed.